everyone. I am pleased to welcome you to our very first ever episode on demystifying customer experience and contact centers. I'm your host, Rafino Chung, and in addition to being a host, I'm also the practice director for CX and contact centers here at UiPath in Europe. The goal for these sessions are to help provide some clarity where we're very much confused about the complexity in the world of CX and contact centers. So the hope is that we're able, no matter if you're an experienced practitioner or brand new to the field, we can provide some insights, some guidance in terms of what you should do and not do. Now, what we'll have for every episode is we'll be joined by industry experts and functional leaders who will help us navigate the ever-changing world of customer experience. And for our topics, there's probably no topic that is perhaps ever changing than the CX tech stack. To help us, I can also think of a better expert to join us for this first episode, and also my esteemed colleague and co-host, Mr. Scott Dresser. And Scott, thank you so much for joining us today. You bring tons of expertise and experience. Can you share for our audience the expertise that you have within the CX space and also the contact center space? And the other question I have for you is, for most of your career, you have been in the CX and call center world. So I'd love to hear what has motivated you to be in the space for such a long time.
Thank you, Rufino, and really happy to be here. I think this is going to be a great series for people to learn. I think people always enjoy talking about customer experience and contact centers. And yes, I have been in this industry a long time, almost 25 years now, and have been at several great companies. Started at Avaya and spent many years there, focused on contact centers, then spent many years at Cisco, and then had an opportunity to spend a few years at Salesforce learning the CRM side of the business, and then actually had an opportunity to be a customer for 6 years and learn what it's like firsthand to be able to implement these types of technologies, and then got to work for a Salesforce partner and a Cisco contact center partner. And now, of course, I'm at UiPath and working on contact center automation for some of our largest customers in the United States. It's such an exciting space and always has been, and never is dull. It changes fast and it seems like it's getting faster every year. So it's a really exciting space and always has been.
Yeah, and I think our backgrounds are quite similar, which is why we're co-hosts for this session. And I think from my standpoint, I spent, just like you, Scott, most of my career in the CX and experience space. So actually, I split it between both the EX side on the employee side. So I was at Workday right before UiPath. I also was the head of product for a tech startup focusing on measuring the employee experience. But I spent the majority of my career at Gartner, almost 16 years, I believe, where I actually launched and then led our customer contact practice in Europe. And I think what I find exciting, just like you, is that it's always changing, it's always dynamic, there are always new technologies, new issues. But also, I love CX because I'm a customer and I can relate to the customer journey and being part of that customer experience. And so why don't we dive right into it and talk a bit about the CX tech stack. Now, I don't know about you, Scott, but I've always been fascinated and intrigued by the CX tech stack. There's many vendors and many technologies, but there's also a bit of the shiny penny syndrome where I think organizations get intrigued by these new technologies and quote unquote best of breed solutions. So very interesting space to talk about. And what I want to do is to bring up this illustrative map of the CX tech stack. This is courtesy of Bain. And I think in terms of the demystifying, what's easy to talk about is the bookends. So on the left-hand side, you have the customer, and on the right-hand side, you have all those back-end systems. But what is confusing is that what I call the fuzzy middle, where you have all these different technologies and vendor logos, where it helps to perhaps identify or verify the customer, perhaps it stores customer data, or it helps to enable and automate the flow between the customer and the company. And Scott, we'd love to ask you, because you are in a very, I think, unique position where, as you mentioned, you are both a customer of these technologies, but you're also a seller of these technologies as well. And we'd love to get your perspective in terms of, firstly, what was your experience working with these technologies at a holistic CS tech stack level, but also perhaps your experience with some of the individual boxes, if you will, on the slide here?
Yeah, I think that if you look back 25 years ago, it's always been, a pretty difficult suite of technologies. And I think that some of that's the very nature of what it's doing, the amount of data, the level of complexity around the integration to systems, the real-time nature and how important a function is. I mean, what's at stake if it was to go down, as an example, or if you have an outage. So it's always been complex, right? But I think that it's gotten more complex over the years because it used to just be a few really key pieces like your IVR and your ACD, which for the most part used to be the same provider. And then you had a CRM, or where you kept your customer records. And then you had a workforce management tool. And then you had a reporting platform. For the most part, maybe knowledge management. Like that was your core stack, and that's what most customers used. And then potentially a legacy system that you had to connect to, like a mainframe. And then I think over the last 10 years plus, we've started to introduce more things like channels and some additional add-on third-party applications that were best of breed. We've started to do things like expand workforce management into workforce optimization. We've introduced things like real-time transcription or speech analytics. We've introduced chat and bots and natural language speech. So it's gotten really complex, and it's been more difficult to make sure that all of these technologies talk to each other. And then what is the data source? And I think that tends to be the crux of the problem of a lot of companies is where is the data and how do you report on it?
Yeah, so I think very siloed and very complex, and I think the CX tech stack in some sense exasperates the organizational problems where organizationally you're already working in silos, and I think the tech stack just reinforces that silo nature. And also, given your experience, then what have you seen? Therefore, is the impact of the evolving tech stack across the last several years, where it's become more complex? How does that impact CX leaders and contact center leaders?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of ways to look at that. There's a couple of things that companies have done trying to chase success or improvements or the customer demands. And that's one of the things that's really caused customers or companies rather to have to adjust to business is the consumer expectation has changed a lot over the years. Like it really used to be, you compared like-minded companies. I think that the book that came out many years ago, the Customer Experience Revolution. I always really liked that book, and I think it was one of the first times I ever read about, hey, customers, as we move forward, aren't comparing hotel chains to hotel chains. They aren't comparing retail companies to retail companies. They're actually comparing best of breed experiences to best of breed. Like they want to be treated like you know them and how they should be serviced regardless of who you are. So they started crossing over industry. I don't care whether you were Apple or Amazon or my car dealership. And the thing is that the consumer didn't care about how complex your systems were, what industry you were in. And that changed everything, right? Because then companies had to really start to think about how do I simplify the experience for a customer, because what they now are expecting, the cost of change was too easy for them as a customer. They would switch based on their most recent experience. So it caused companies to start to buy a lot of point solutions and try to really siphon off these easy digital experiences. And it created a lot of silo technologies that were broken, that broke that tech stack. And I think it made matters much worse, right? Because we created all these independent systems that didn't talk to each other, a lot of broken processes. And I think it's created the mess that we're kind of sitting in right now, to be honest with you. And also, who owns those systems? I think that's also been some of the issue as we see within companies. Is it in marketing? Is it in innovation? Or is it in traditional contact center or support? So is it viewed as a cost center, or is it viewed as some sort of growth engine of marketing, part of acquisition? So that largely, I think, is what drives some of this behavior.
Yeah, and I do think it's this theme of unintended consequences. Customer expectations have changed quite a bit. We talk a lot about the Amazon effect, where customers, when they shop at Amazon, Amazon knows everything about them, their shopping history, their whole context. So now, because of what they experience shopping Amazon, they expect the same level of understanding because of the full customer history, full context, full issues. And so we tried to meet that expectations, but I guess the way that we went about it, having these point solutions, actually in some sense did more harm than good, because now we provide a very disjointed experience because our tech stack is so disjointed. And so I think from an ideal world, we would like to have a view of the full end-to-end customer lifecycle, as you can see on the slide here, where you do have marketing being connected to sales, to service, with the back office teams as well, and then also connected to loyalty, retention, and your voice of the customer teams. And Scott, obviously this is important, but I would love to hear from you, based on your experience as a customer and also as a seller, what have you seen as some of the importance of getting this right, but also what are the pitfalls when we get this wrong?
Yeah, and actually, I'm pretty passionate about this topic, and I didn't fully understand this until I became a customer. I was one of those sellers that believed in things conceptually, and I sold visions for many years to a company, again, whether I was at Avaya, Cisco, Salesforce even, and genuinely tried to build you a customer service strategy that was all-encompassing, customer 360, service and sales, and genuinely did my due diligence, right, for a company. But once I became a customer, what I realized, and again, I used to say this a lot, and I think people didn't always appreciate it, but I would say, hey, within a contact center, there's very little that we do that makes a customer call us. Everything is a result of something happening. And that's not saying other people are to blame. It's saying that something is going on that makes a customer decide to call us. So what are those things, and why don't we use them to our benefit, either to improve those things or to use predictive behavior to prevent those things from occurring? So if we know what's happening with marketing, why don't we drive that behavior to the web? If we know what's happening from a sales perspective, like a new offer or program, let's drive that to a time of day, a time of year, to the location that we want, via self-service, via an app. If it's service related, a failed service experience or product experience, well then how do we want to handle that? If it's something that the customer experience organization or contact center did and it was supposed to go somewhere after us that failed downstream, well then how do we put in things that close loop those experiences so that it doesn't require a callback for an escalation or some other potential failed experience? And it's everything from billing cycles to usage alerts to seasonality. I mean, everything is predictable. There's no organization within a company that has more data about how people use products or services than the call center team or the customer experience organization. So use that to your advantage to prevent people from calling or to better service them. And I just don't think we've done a very good job of that as an industry.
Yeah, and I think there's the inherent pitfalls of the tech stack. There's the inherent pitfalls of how organizations and functions are set up. So taking that as the reality, how does UiPath therefore help to enable this end-to-end customer lifecycle?
Well, to be honest, it's when I was a customer that I said to myself, I would love to come to UiPath, right? Or an automation company, but UiPath was the first that came to my mind because it's really not realistic for me to ask the company that I worked for or any other company, hey, you need to start replacing all these systems. You need to go do a wholesale swap out and go to a single platform that does all these things, right? Or you need to spend all of the money to integrate these on the back end or make sure every system talks to every other system. Like, that's not realistic, right? Or if you did hardwire them, every single use case, every possible scenario, you will be spending a tremendous amount of effort. So why not use something like automation plus AI, the capabilities that we provide, to tie in those experiences across systems, especially those that are hard to access, and connect those experiences across marketing, sales systems, service systems, right? To make sure that we can connect that customer journey across platforms and provide automation where you want it so that we can capture things that I was kind of mentioning that are either upstream or downstream and providing the information when you want it or where you want it. And again, we're not replacing any of those systems. We're just empowering them so they can do a better job at what they're supposed to do, right? Whether it's enhance your self-service strategy or contain calls in an IVR or empower an agent at the desktop, any of the things that you want to be able to do, we just allow you to do it better through connecting systems, right? And providing automation so you don't have to do all the heavy work. And to me, that's the biggest strength that we have.
And I do think it's a difference between reality in terms of what is possible versus the more dream state. And I think the world that we operate in is the reality of you have these disparate systems. It will take quite a lot of effort to integrate them. And so that's where UiPath, I think, filling in the gray space, or in our slide, the white spaces, really adds value. And do you have examples in terms of the value that organizations get from UiPath and automation filling in those white spaces or gray spaces?
Yeah, so I think one of the challenges that we've seen is part of it we've talked about, because in a typical organization, each of these boxes is owned by a different leader. Okay, so if I'm a marketing leader, I'm thinking, how do I solve my problems? NPS, CSAT, acquisition, I'm doing marketing automation. How do I solve that with my own technologies, my own projects, my own budget? This year, sales is doing their own thing, customer service their own thing, loyalty, retention, customer success. So how do we wrap this umbrella around it, whether it's through a center of excellence or innovation or strategy organization, someone that has some oversight, because there's things that can happen all throughout these cycles. And we have customers that are doing some really cool things around marketing and using it for product catalogs or taxonomy or commerce, so that you don't have to actually manually do all that inventory. We're doing things for sales automation, converting leads and managing leads and lead assignments, so that you can take things from marketing to sales leads, and then obviously creating things like Customer 360 when it gets to service. So there's people that are doing this all across the tech stack, right? So it's really just, how do we make sure that if you have goals in mind, that you are prioritizing those things, not each person doing them in isolation, so that we achieve them as an organization. Like, an example of that would be, everybody says, oh, we want to cut costs, we want to grow revenue, and we want to increase customer satisfaction. Everybody says those three things, right? Okay, well, a couple of those things are at odds with each other. So if one of them is trying to improve customer satisfaction while the other one is trying to reduce their labor, that's not a great situation. So we need to be finding technologies and improve business processes that complement each other, not lowering headcount and labor, so that we can't drive cross-sell, upsell, and it also hurts the customer experience at the same time. So that's where we see competing priorities a lot in some of these organizations.
Yeah, that makes sense. And we talked a lot about the enterprise view, right? So the different pieces working together in some type of cohesive manner, and how UiPath can bring it together. One thing we haven't quite talked about was the tech stack in relation to the person. And maybe you can give a view in terms of what you see as the implications of the tech stack for, let's say, the call center agent, if you will.
Yeah, and I would say that next to the customer lifecycle, agent experience is probably my next biggest priority. I love customers, but I love agents more. I hate saying that, but I do. And the reason why I love agents more is because I learned this as a customer, running and being around call center agents. I was convinced through that experience that agents genuinely want to help customers. You don't have to convince agents to help customers. They want to do it. They genuinely want to do it. So the easier you make their life, they will improve the customer satisfaction. It's just that we never focus on their experience. And there's so many upsides to improving their life, as opposed to chasing a consumer that we cannot predict, okay, that will change and flip on you in a dime. But the agent, if we improve their life, it will increase loyalty. We can improve the development of them. They will become lifelong employees. You can promote them. There's so many benefits of choosing their life, right? So I used to ask them all the time and tell them, like in focus sessions, my goal is to make sure when you sit down in the morning that you do not dread your job, that you are not dreading opening up your screen and looking at it. And then at the end of the day, that you are not exhausted and frustrated before you go home to your family. Like if I can do those two things, then we've been successful. So how do we build systems and applications that make it easy for you to do your job? If you're constantly having to toggle and manage data and copying and pasting and do all that while you're trying to listen to a customer, we have failed you, okay? So that should be the goal, in my opinion, of every organization, because then it will be easier to hire people, to train them, to get them ramped, to be in full productivity. They will be happier, your attrition will lower. They will, not only that, but they will be more tenured. So everything else just goes in the right direction, everything. And that's such an easy thing to do. It really is an easy thing to do.
Yeah, I think there's 2 points I want to build on. You mentioned the importance of the agent, but I do think we actually are making the agent's lives even more difficult. The first thing is, the last 20 years of self-service investments have really taken away the easy issues and the medium issues as self-service gets smarter. And now the complexity of issues that's remaining for the agents are all those very, very difficult issues. And then on top of that, we're asking agents to do more, whether it's to serve and sell, whether it's to serve multiple product lines. So we're also making the job harder for them. And you mentioned, Scott, about making their lives easier. Any examples of 1 or 2 tips in terms of how the tech stack or technology or automation can make the life easier for our call center agents?
Yeah, I think that, again, and it's hard. It is hard being a leader. And if I didn't have the experience that I had going into being a customer, I could have fallen into the same trap. And the reason I wanted to be a customer is because I had sold so many projects in the past that went off the rails, okay? That you sell this vision that everybody's in alignment with, and then it just doesn't happen. Or phase 1 happens and the rest do not. And I wanted to learn firsthand, how does that happen? And what does it take to prevent it from happening? And I will say it took a tremendous amount of effort. And I had some amazing business partners and stakeholders that I worked with and bosses that if it wasn't for them, the project wouldn't have been a success, right? It does require a lot of people, but what you have to do is you have to pick the right technology stack. And I still see people going out and buying best of breed CCaaS technology, and then they'll buy a CRM, and then they'll go buy best of breed bots, and then they'll want to do a Gen AI pilot. And I'll say, is it integrated? No, we're just putting a Gen AI pilot on the desktop that's not integrated to any of those other technologies. And I just kind of am bewildered. Like, how do you expect an agent to handle all of that? So I think one of the things that we do that I've grown an appreciation for is we like the hard stuff. We want the stuff that is really difficult. The systems, the processes, the ones where it's a lot of data, it's complex, and we want to simplify that. Because what we've seen is through self-service and IVRs, we've taken all the easy work and we left the agents with all the hard work. And so their job's gotten harder. We keep saying the attrition has stayed high, but it's because we've left them with all the really difficult work. So that's the stuff that we need to really resolve. And luckily we can do that with the technology that we have, and we have to simplify their desktop experience. And we haven't really done very well as an industry doing that.
It's ironic because the more complex the issue, by definition, is that the more disparate systems that the agent has to access to resolve said complex issue. And that's where us bringing the different systems and data together is really helpful for the agent. It looks like time has gone by really quickly, and we're about at time. So Scott, I do want to thank you for your expertise on this very first episode. So thank you, Scott, for that in terms of demystifying the tech stack, talking about the silo nature, and I think also accepting the reality that from both an organizational perspective, but from a technology perspective, it'll always be somewhat disconnected. And so instead of trying to chase the dream of integrating everything in one all-encompassing solution, it's all about how do we connect the dots and fill in those white spaces to bring that unified customer journey for the customer, and then also help the agent as well. But anything you want to add to my takeaways or anything that I missed in the summary, Scott?
Yeah, no, the one thing I would say, when you work with agents, they don't like to complain. So you just have to get them opening up, and just remember they're really fast. So don't focus on tenured agents, right? focus on the new hires. And these tenured agents know how to navigate systems, complex systems. So they make it look easy. So that's part of the challenge is when you see them swapping screens and going through everything, you're like, oh, this isn't that difficult. Well, yeah, it took them 2 years to be able to do that, right? So don't be afraid to ask hard questions. Make sure they know that their answers are going to be treated with confidence and that you're trying to help them, and they'll tell you what you need to know. But it's such a great space, and love the contact center world. And hopefully this was helpful to everybody. And thanks, Rufino, for hosting us today.
Well, thank you, Scott, for joining and being the co-host. And thank you, everyone, for joining us on this very first episode. In the future, Scott and I will co-host. We'll talk about some other topics like trying to demystify automation and AI for CX and contact centers. And then we'll also talk about how do we future-proof the contact center as well. So some very interesting topics coming up. But with that said, thank you very much for joining us today, and we'll see you for episode number 2.